Going. And we should be live.
Welcome to QuaranCon 2021's Asian Author Roundtable. I am, well, you can probably see on the screen there, I'm John Kong, but go by JC. I am so happy today to have four amazing authors. If you guys want to introduce yourself, why don't we start with Aliette?
Hi, my name is Aliette Bedard. I write a bunch of things, most notably the Suya Universe, which is a Vietnamese-inspired galactic space opera. And more recently, Fireheart Tiger, which is a sapphic romantic fantasy inspired by pre-colonial Vietnam. And there's lots of food and tea in my books.
Ooh, I like it already. Actually, I've read Fireheart Tiger, and I've also read Servant of the Underworld, and I just love both of them. Vita, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vita Cruz. I'm based in the Philippines. I am a writer, a developmental editor with Darling Axe. I self-published my short story collection, Beyond the Line of Trees, and I Think I Froze Again. We'll see if that works out later.
It's a good picture, so you can keep on talking. We can hear you.
I am mother of 10 dogs who are all asleep right now, hopefully. And my books have a lot of Filipino folklore and retellings and colonizers. Yeah.
Since we're on the theme of Filipino folklore and colonizers, let's talk to Kay.
Hi, I'm K.S. Villoso. I'm the author of The Wolf of Orinaro, which came out from Orbit Books last year. And book 3 is coming out next month. And it's The Dragon of Jinsaying. So yeah.
Cover art. Oh my goodness.
And ML Wong, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm ML Wong. I'm based in the US and I wrote The Sword of Kaigen, which is a Japanese-inspired fantasy. It's self-published. If you've heard of it, it's probably because it won last year's SBFBO.
Self-published fantasy blog off for those of you who have never heard of it.
Yeah.
But it's huge, basically. Yeah, very big competition.
Very chunky.
The book is big too, size-wise. And Andrea.
I'm Andrea Stewart. I write fantasy and science fiction. My debut book, The Bone Shard Daughter, came out in 2020. Great year for a book to come out.
Something happening in 2020?
And then the sequel, The Bone Shard Emperor, is going to be out in November. And I'm working on book 3 right now.
Wow. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. We're basically gonna go right to it, which is talking about, number one, do you feel that being Asian as an author has been a benefit, or have there been faced issues with that, with regarding to finding readers or industry stereotypes? And then there was silence.
Well, Vita, did you get the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Oh
no.
Echo.
Did we lose somebody?
No, we just have an echo. It's okay.
Weird echo things.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool.
No one wants to go first.
Tough question.
It's a complicated question because it's not like we stop and think about who we are specifically when you start writing out, right? You write, and then maybe along the way, it's a journey kind of thing. Along the way, you encounter certain things that are, it makes you wonder, is this actually what this experience is supposed to be like? Or you're just trying to show your culture or the way you approach something, and then people will start asking, I can't place myself, or that's been my experience. because it's complex. Like, it's not that I think, like, it's not from an Asian's perspective, it's more from a Filipino perspective. And like, Filipino culture is a thing that's hard to pin down, because we're the only thing that unites Filipinos is the our colonizers. Actually, it's a lot of islands, it's actually a lot of cultures, and in a way trying to show that, for an outsider, when they look at it, they're not quite sure what it's about, because to be honest, we're not quite sure what we're about either. Vida probably agrees.
Too
I was
early
gonna
in the
say what
morning
Vita
to be
thought.
attacked like this, Kay.
Well, Vita, do you have any insights or any opinion on that?
Do you mean if being Asian has like been a benefit or a
Or specifically addressing what Kay was speaking to in terms of the Philippines being such a diverse country already, with so many different types of cultures and languages.
uh like when I go to speak on panels and stuff, I'm super it's like Kay said, I think of myself as Filipino first before I think of myself as Asian, because most people, when they say Asian, they think of East Asians, Japan, Korea, China, and like they completely forget that South Asia and Southeast Asia exist. Um, but also when I speak on panels like this, I'm super conscious of the fact that I put an extra effort to sound smart and nuanced, because there are a lot of people out there who think of my people as domestic workers, blue collar workers. Um, I was in a contest a couple of years ago in the US, and the the white people asked me, "So do you guys live with thatched roofs?" And I can't, I don't know. I feel the extra pressure to represent, even though Kay is right. There's so many of us,
Did we
and
lose her again? Or is that just me?
That's you. Well, I can still hear her.
yeah,
Okay.
there's so many of us, and obviously I can't speak for everybody, but I need to make sure that I make everybody look good when I'm representing them, because the thatched roof question really gets to me until this day.
Have any of the rest of you gotten questions like that, or any type of comment that sort of stereotypes your
Well,
particular ethnic group or Asians as a whole?
I think that's actually really interesting to me. And like that does sound really hurtful, and I'm sorry that you've gotten comments like that. Um, but I think it I think you say there's this problem where, when people in the US or, people maybe elsewhere in the Western world refer to Asian, they think of East Asian, but then that also is a pretty meaningless classification. Um, and this is not even getting into the enmity between East Asian nations, which is so fraught and uncomfortable. But then also, like, um, so I'm East Asian. My dad is East Asian. He's Han Chinese, so he's an ethnic majority, at least like genetically, he belongs to an ethnic majority. Um, but he grew up in extreme poverty that I think is not something that gets associated with Chinese people in the US, with Chinese people who come to the US. And um I don't think it's necessarily that, like, oh, when you next time you meet a Chinese person, you should think about the fact that maybe he grew up in a house made of mud, which my dad did, but that something to be cognizant of is you're talking about a continent, and there are people in every country of that continent who grew up in spectacular wealth, and there are people who, I think my dad didn't touch a television set until he was 10. Like technology was a thing that kind of trickled into his area. He never liked camping when we were growing up because he was like, but I spent my whole childhood sleeping outside and like with animals and with bugs. Why would I want to do that again? Why would I want to sleep under a mosquito net again? So I think the thing to be cognizant of is that you're looking at such a huge range of experiences that it's silly to even boil it back down to nationality, which I think is another thing that Kay had said.
I mean, it's really complicated, right? Because I've been in genre for about 10, well, 12 years now, and I mean, there's a lot more visibly Asian people now than there were when I started out, especially since I started out in the UK, and sometimes it really felt like I was the only Asian person in the entire con, which was a lovely feeling. But there's certainly this kind of, because there aren't that many of us, right? There's a pressure that the Vida was mentioning, right? That thing that we somehow have to speak and represent for our ethnicities, our overall continent, or whatever group we happen to be pegged as. And there is, there is no single Asian story, there is no single Vietnamese story, but a lot of people, especially outsiders, tend to want to flatten that, right? And at the same time, there's a communality of experience that people don't often think of, right? There's a book I was reading when there's a character who was second generation Vietnamese American in the late 80s, and the author, who was not Vietnamese, did not mention at all the Vietnamese American War. And I'm like, did they grow up in the rock? Like, how did they think, their parents, I mean, they did mention very definitely that their parents had immigrated. And I was like, okay, but there is a very specific shape to that immigration, unless you tell me why not, right? I'm perfectly willing to listen to reasons why not, but I kind of feel, it kind of feels more like you kind of forgot. So I think it's very, we get into issues of nuance, and there's, I don't know if that's also been your experience, but there's conversations that I will not have outside of group, because I don't feel that, essentially I feel that we're going to be judged on a set of really unfair criteria. So, very complex issues of representations and nuances, and for instance, relationship between Asian nations, that sort of thing, that I sometimes I worry that they will be misinterpreted if we try having them in public.
Andrea, you're the only one who hasn't spoken on this. Did you have any input?
So I know your original question was, do I feel it's a detriment or a positive, or I don't, it's like, I feel like it's hard to break it down like that. Like on one hand, I'm thinking, just as I was growing up and wanting to be a writer and reading fantasy, there was not any fantasy by Asian writers I could find in the library. It was all, it was almost all like white writers who were writing about like farm boys who were becoming heroes. So, I honestly didn't feel really comfortable writing more Asian inspired fantasy until I got a lot older, because I didn't really see that that was a thing that could be done. So I guess in that way, it's kind of a detriment, because I feel like I could have been doing so much more than, kind of repeating the things that I had already seen. But at the same time, I feel like right now there are, I mean, on one hand, there are still few Asian authors, but there are many more than when I was growing up. So I think it's a positive on that end. But like everyone else was saying, there's a lot of complicated issues to deal with. I feel like one of the things that I have to correct people on a lot of times is that my book is like Asian inspired and not like an analog for China or anything. I don't want people to think that I am trying to represent like this is, Chinese culture, or this is, supposed to be China in some way, or these are Chinese words or anything like that, because I don't want to like fall afoul of those things. And also it's not meant to be that. So I feel like there is a lot of kind of complicated issues, whereas if you are reading something that is inspired by like, medieval European, people tend to be a little more, I think, forgiving and less thinking that that's supposed to be a direct analog.
I'd asked the question, I should have prefaced it by saying that I had once talked to Cindy Pong, who was doing YA Asian fantasy, I think, in the early 2010s. And she had a very hard time finding an agent or finding a book. She found an agent, but she had a very hard time finding a publisher that would pick up her work. And so I'm just seeing that nowadays there's so much more out there. I mean, I brought this stack of books here. You have Joan He's Descendants of the Crane. For middle grades, we have Henry Lian's Peace Sprout Chen. We have this book. I don't know who wrote this. Fonda Lee's Shade City. Elizabeth Lynn's Spin the Dawn. I mean, we have a lot. And this is just what's on my shelf. Actually, I have Ken Veal's books.
Yeah, and I also feel like we've seen a lot of successes in terms of Asian fantasy. On some level, there's always been stuff that's been published, but it didn't necessarily hit what I think of the bar of visibility, right? Whereas you had things like Fonda's Jade City, R.F. Kuang's Poppy War, for instance, that were really big hits in terms of, critical attention, sales, and that in turn opens the door to more fantasy like this, which practically means more Asian fantasy, and we are not complaining, right, on that front. But it's certainly been interesting to watch that happening over the last, because Cindy was 2008, I believe, or something like that. So the first one was the first one called Silver Phoenix?
Silver Phoenix.
Yes, so the first one was 2008, right? And I do remember at the time that that was when the second set of covers were actually whitewashed, right? Because they thought that they were being too aggressively, I assume that the issue was that they were being too aggressively Asian, but I certainly remember seeing it come out at the time and seeing the cover, and was like the first cover, not the whitewash one, right? And going like, wow, that's pretty cool.
That was a pretty cool cover. I don't know, I have the ebook somewhere, so it's a really cool cover. They've changed it completely to be a symbolic type of cover instead. Yeah, but it seems that, so Misty306 on YouTube here is asking, do you believe the 1990s anime manga craze helped make East Asian stories more popular in the West? And she's thinking specifically about Battle Royale. To give some background, I've read quite a bit of Asian fantasy, and you have Daughter of the Empire, which is Feist and Wirtz who did that, and then Tales of the Otori by Jan Hearn. And these are all very, I guess, Japanese focused to begin with, but I think we're seeing a huge change now.
Well, you had them mostly written by non-Asian people, right?
And Storm Dancer, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
We can have a fun conversation. But I certainly feel that, in many ways, like Cindy's books, it's really a shame that she had such a hard time, but they were really ahead of their time, right? I think if we're talking about a kind of, I guess, rise of the Asian SFF, I would put that more around 2000, I don't know, 10s, right? The 2010s or maybe 2015s even. When was Ken Liu's book was 2015, I think, right? Roughly
2015, 2016.
Yeah, 2016, and you had that kind of huge influx when Ken won the Hugo, when you started having the big influx. When did Poppy War come out? 2018?
I think it's 2018. And Fonda also 2018, I think, with Jade City.
Yes, Funda was definitely 2018 because I was at the 2019 World Fantasy Awards, so that would have made it 2018. So, I mean, to me,
So
that's kind of the, I guess, if you had to point at a pivot year for me, that's kind of that pack of years somewhere in there where it.
And John, I wanted to throw back at you because you pay way more attention to these trends that I do, but I think that it's also important to draw a distinction between traditional publishing and self-publishing, because in self-publishing, well, first off, there are just a lot more authors in the pool doing whatever they want, for better or for worse. But you don't have to get past the gatekeepers who may or may not, want an Asian book on the docket this season. Or I don't know anything about traditional publishing. I apologize, but like, I know that there are multiple subgenres of Asian fantasy that do really well self-published on Amazon right now. And they're a lot of them are written by Asian authors and a lot of them are written by white authors, but the point is they sell. There's a niche there that really makes money. There are multiple niches that really make money, and I was wondering if you had a read on like the timeline of that and how related you think it was to Asian fantasy sort of breaking into traditional publishing.
I do, but I'm not a panelist. We can talk about it later.
Okay.
I don't want to suck up all the oxygen in the room. So, does anyone else have a thought about, like, I think Misty was asking about Battle Royale, the influences. Did the Japanese stories influence yours at all? Anybody here? Or total disconnect?
It's hard for me to say because, like, on one hand, growing up in the Philippines, anime was pretty big, even when we were little, like all the way up till 80s. At the same
Still big.
time, yeah. At the same time, Japan was also one of our colonizers. So to be able to say that, like I don't know, if I don't feel like in terms of representation, that's why I kind of think of myself Filipino first, because it's a very unique, like you're always working with your colonizers media, no matter which way you go at it. So, like when I write, I don't know if people don't specifically say, like in the beginning when I started writing, it was just fantasy. It wasn't specifically Asian like people think of Asia, which is like East Asian markers. And that's the complicated part, because you're using stuff that's from European or medieval fantasy, but people don't specifically think of Asian. So when there's something a little bit off, they're like, "What? Why is this person, unable to write properly?"
Well, I mean, I'm coming from a country that got Japanese and Chinese colonization. It's kind of a little tricky to also comment on that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think I was aware of Battle Royale being particularly significant for me, right? It's not what I think of as a watershed moment or anything. It may have been in certain areas of the West, but that, to me, that's just not a marker.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. I don't think that anime and Japanese media in particular helped usher in Asian fantasy. If anything, what I've seen in the early 2010s was a lot of Western comic artists drawing in anime style, but they had very American stories, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Anyway, what I'm seeing now is there are more authors being published today who admit to having been influenced by anime growing up, rather than publishing being influenced by anime and other East Asian media. It's kind of the other way around.
Well, I mean, you had a lot of anime going around even in the 80s, right? There was a big I don't know what you want to call it, cultural push or something. Well, there was a net export of anime, not only all over Asia, but also, there was, at least growing up in France, you also had that very significant push of regular anime being broadcast, even if I mean, some of it was really mangled. I shudder to think of what they actually did with Sailor Moon in terms of making it palatable for Western, they thought was the Western preteen audience, which was mostly disguising a couple of the queer relationships to make it less scary, I guess. But
Podcast Sakura. Anyway,
it's just
I remember it would end with like a moral lesson or something. It was weird.
well, yeah.
Well, speaking of anime, one of the big influences, I think, for a lot of youth here in the US is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I've seen people compare that to ML's book, Sword of Kaigen. Is there sort of a Last Airbender feel to your story? Was it an
And
influence for you?
I readily admit that and a lot of anime were influences for the Sword of Kaigen. It's so complicated. And so a lot of the really popular self-published niche Asian fantasy genres that do really well on Amazon are definitely super influenced by anime and video games. And that's fun and good. And I tried to take a lot of the fun and good from that, but I also don't think I would have been very comfortable borrowing those tropes as liberally as I did, had I not actually lived in Japan for a while and lived with Japanese families. And I had both mainland Japanese and Okinawan friends all through, definitely all through high school, with whom I spoke primarily Japanese. So had it not been for that, I would have felt a lot weirder, borrowing the tropes if my only exposure to Japanese people had been through anime. But I don't, of course, and then now I'm just making assumptions, and I don't know the experiences of a lot of the people who write in these sort of anime and video game inspired subgenres. I don't I don't know what their experience is with Japanese culture.
I think this is tending towards one of the smaller elephants in the room. But before I get to that, Andrea, did you have any Japanese anime influences in your book?
There's not really. I didn't watch a lot of anime. So not until I got a lot older, and I've only seen like a few shows, like Neon Genesis Evangelion, like that. I have not seen a lot, so I can't say that my book is terribly influenced by them now.
Okay, so going back to this tiny elephant in the room, was that we've been talking about, like, once again, the early authors of Asian fantasy who were mostly doing Japanese style, and then we were talking about the influence of anime. So I guess do we want to tackle Jay Kristoff's Storm Dancer and some of the controversy that just blew up last week? Or do we not want to touch that?
I actually don't know a lot about what happened there because I was following concurrent drama. So if anyone else wants to talk about it, go ahead.
I only know a little bit. I have not actually read his book. I've seen, a couple of snippets posted online, and the fact that there was an interview where his research sounded not like research. So, I mean, my impression is that it was a poorly researched rendition of Japanese culture. So that is always kind of, I think, it stings a little, I think, when you're looking at it from the perspective of an Asian author, where you're seeing a white author write an Asian culture poorly and get a lot of attention. And then meanwhile, there are some Asian authors who are like struggling to write something that is authentic. So yeah, I think that's just my take on it.
I think it's that complex thing where maybe out in the West people equate Asian culture with anime, and it's really hard to like step away from it, or even like Asian culture with automatically Japanese culture. And I don't know, like even Japanese culture and anime, to me it's not analogous, because anime covers a wide spectrum of genres. There's fantasy, there's sci-fi. It's a medium. It's not necessarily about culture. But you bring that out to the West, it gets really complicated, because it's that thing where they reduce your culture, your various cultures down to like a few markers, and then suddenly that's enough for them. But like for us, like with me, with the way I approach my work, I don't actually like look at Filipino myths or whatever. To me, my work is about me processing myself, like my experiences in life, and then it just so happens that being Filipino is a big part of that. But that I like to say that I don't do research, because I don't want to say that I did X amount of research. My whole life I'm reading always. Like I'm consuming a lot of history books. It's just those years of learning about yourself and then trying to put that down in your work. Whereas for other people, it's as simple as, oh, I read a couple of things. Like I read Wikipedia, and then I ate a certain kind of food, and that's
But then people will believe the people who went on the Wikipedia dive and not you.
yeah.
Yeah. I kind of feel like so when I was growing up, and I didn't really know what to name what I was reading, right? But what I was really missing actually was the notion that people like me could actually be in books and not be the weird aliens with the weird food. But I used to read quite a few Chinese books about China that were written by white people. Not books about Vietnam, because not enough of us, and they tended to be written about the Vietnamese-American War, and I find that a little triggering. So not touching a whole lot of these, but there's a complex relationship between Vietnam and China, but certainly enough common points that I could see what they were trying to do, and because of colonization, we've had quite a few Chinese myth and Chinese elements of culture made their way and be transformed into Vietnamese culture. So a lot of it was familiar. But when I was reading those books written by white authors, it felt like they were writing about a completely different country than the one my grandmother was telling me about, right? Like it was a kind of very hollow theme park. It felt like Disneyland, right? Where the paint was okay, right? The kind of external layer of it, like the outside layer of the egg was okay, and then there was nothing behind it, right? It just felt like this kind of like very shallow costume fantasy. So I thought that they must have been writing about some kind of like fake Chinese place that they only knew about on some level. And I remember that a lot when I see that kind of thing happen. And I find it intensely frustrating that people then believe that, that eggshell fantasy is actually more real than the books that actual Asian people are writing, and that keep, you have, I'm sure a lot of us have had the experience of, oh, I just couldn't connect to the character, or the world building made no sense. And you go, I'm sorry, are you making an effort here? Or, but part of this, quite aside from, the actual openness of mind and the willingness to read something that is different, also comes from the fact that there's a series of tropes and cliche that get recycled over and over again, and that do not actually have a whole lot of actual truth, I guess, to them, right? Because they do not contain lived-in experience.
Have any of you had the same similar experience where you were reading an account of a culture that you thought you know pretty well, but you felt that it didn't quite, it was just everything was all surface level and nothing deeper than the surface?
All the time, actually. But when I was 18 years old, I encountered the YA anthology Fairy Reel, Tales from the Twilight Realm by Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling. And it's one of my favorite books ever, and I can credit it for pushing me to want to be a writer. There's a particular story there by Holly Black called The Night Market, and she set it in the Philippines. All the characters are Filipino, and in the notes, she said that she had her mother-in-law, her Filipino mother-in-law, tell her about life in the Philippines at a certain period. And while I found it cool to find Tagalog words there in that story, I, even at 18, had this niggling feeling that I could do better. And I don't know if that was childish, youthful arrogance or the fact that a white woman was writing my culture and it didn't feel authentic. But um, that's how it is. And I keep thinking about that. She didn't do it badly, but she didn't do it in a way that resonated with me either. And yet I still keep thinking about the story all the time. I think about it every time I encounter someone writing about Filipino culture and they're not from there.
Does anyone want to add to that, or other insights? Or have there been people who have written a culture that you feel belongs, well, I shouldn't say belongs to you, but that you belong to, that someone from outside of that culture has done it well? I'm really just killing the questions today because like silence.
I mean, like, when I was a history major, I got really sensitive to this kind of condescending tone in any source material, and it's very much like with history. Well, not with history, because it's history when it's Westerners studying Western stuff, and when you go to study, some lesser culture, they call it anthropology. You're studying down, and there's this tone associated with that writing. And I just recently went back to a book on like, oh shoot, what's the name? It's I liked it because it had English translations of um relevant relevant to the time period Chinese texts. People's think pieces on Taoism and Buddhism and whatnot from a given time period. And I found that I couldn't read it because of the dismissive tone with which all these sources were framed. I guess I could go just read the sources, but the bulk of this book was the material around the sources that was going to explain to you what they really meant. And it's an old book, so all the authors were white, and they really take this tone like, we figured out what everybody in China was thinking during this century, and we're going to tell you about it in language that you can understand, dummy. And I was like, whoa. And it was so off-putting in a way that I didn't really register the first time I read it, because I think the first time I read it was before I'd gone to college and thought really critically about this whole business of studying down and framing just sort of Western scholarship as the authority on something that, well, clearly it's not, because that doesn't add up. That doesn't make any sense. Sorry, maybe that was a little unrelated to the question.
That's,
I
I
don't,
was gonna say
sorry.
it's quite insightful, but please.
No, I was just gonna say I don't think it's unrelated because well, the Philippine equivalent is our ancestors didn't really write anything down on anything permanent. So everything that we know today about pre-colonial cultures was first recorded by Spanish. And of course, they wrote it with a tone of, uh, this is how to better get to know your new subjects, so, and how to govern them, you know? And it's been really difficult to look at it with a critical eye and figure out, are they talking down or is this really how it is? I don't know. And this kind of thing still haunts me when I'm doing research on my for my writing, because it's like what Kay said earlier. It's lived experience for her, but on the other hand, if you're writing historical Filipino fantasy, you need to do a butt ton of research, and a lot of that research is coded racially. And this is the kind of baggage I'm bringing to a story, and then suddenly someone goes, for example, oh, this Beauty and the Beast retelling is like mixed with Lord of the Rings because we have a tree giant, when Capra is not actually a tree giant, it is a humanoid living in a tree. And then all the illustrations I get are of a literal tree, and so I'm dealing with that, and then I'm dealing with these people, and you know what? I get it. I get it why everyone's tired.
I mean,
I,
it's I don't know. It's a set of particularly pernicious double standards, and also a set of I I'm not gonna name names, but I had a conversation with someone about why it was inappropriate to use the Japanese imperial flag on the cover of an anthology, and they thought it was cool.
Ooh.
And I am like, why am I the one
God.
providing the emotional education here? Really, like, I'm tired. And they wanted to be comforted, and I was like, it's exhausting, right? You really should know better. And why am I the one providing this work? Because I feel I have to, obviously, but it's unfair. A lot of a lot of the text I'm currently reading is like from 19th century Vietnam is like seen through colonizers' eyes, and I also get the sheer desire to just want to set fire to everything.
Is that where
But
Fireheart Tartar? I mean, setting fire to things.
I like it. you know, Certainly setting fire to Paris in the House of Thunder and Flames was fun.
So, I mean, I guess, Aliette is Vietnamese and ML is Chinese and Andrea's Taiwanese and Kay and
I'm Chinese. Sorry.
are you Chinese? I thought you were Taiwanese the whole time.
Yeah. No.
Oops. Okay, put in my mouth. Do you ever feel that people sort of look at your books and think, this is what's being represented, that you're an authority on this? And do you have a response to that?
I definitely feel that weight of, like feeling like people are looking at it as I am the authority, which is funny because, as we were talking about earlier, everybody has very, very different experiences. Like Asia encompasses so many different cultures, even just China. Like one of the things that I'm always telling people is that what I think of as Chinese food is generally like Cantonese food, and there are so many other regions of China. So I think that is always something that I am thinking about and am anxious about, because I don't want people to think that this is what it's like for everybody or everybody's experience of Asian culture.
I'd like to note where I live, what they call Chinese food. It's American, and it's good. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's not. Anyway,
right. I mean, when I say Cantonese, I'm saying not like authentic, but like,
right. Well, you live in the Bay
combined
Area,
with.
so I mean, I assume a lot of your friends get to eat some really good, authentic food.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of different there's Sichuan food and yeah, Hunan food. It's not just, but anyways, that's another topic.
That's another topic altogether.
I mean, I guess I'm coming at it from, finally reaching the venerable age of being an actual Asian auntie. But this is starting. I'm kind of, I mean, I've always been very clear that, this is my experience and the experiences of my family and, myself and, well, in this particular case, the Kin, right, because I belong to the dominant ethnic Vietnamese group. And kind of, I don't quite know how to put it. I feel it's really unfair to put on us the weight to actually represent our entire group. So my attitude is basically I do not have a whole lot of to give anymore, and I kind of feel like it's not on me to deal with people's wrong-headed idea of what it should be like, right? Again, it's I don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm kind of past the whole. I really dislike the way that the system makes us responsible for systemic issues, right? The fact that there are not enough of us around is definitely not on us. The fact that people get the wrong idea of our cultures, may get the wrong idea of our cultures because they believe that everything we say is representative, is also not on us. And don't get me wrong, I do get the value of a good education, but I also think that there's a point at which people should also put in some work.
I just wanted to say that I get really, really uncomfortable when people take that sort of people look at me and my relationship with the Sword of Kaigen that way, because I'm not even Japanese. And I think, I don't want to call anybody out. There was an instance in which I was really clear that I didn't want the book described as own voices because it's extremely not. One generation removed, members of my family were victims of genocide by the Japanese. So, and the Sword of Kaigen was my really a kind of convoluted way of me dealing with the idea of Japan and empire in a way where I was trying to be really empathetic, but the technical truth of the matter is that I'm like Jake Kristoff and a Caucasian author who wrote a Japanese fantasy. But most Western readers see the name Wong and they don't even know that that's, it just gets filed as Asian, and to them that's indistinct from Japan, and that's massively uncomfortable. And of course I don't expect everyone to understand the strange things that were going on in my brain when I conceived some of the concepts in this. And I've actually discontinued the universe because as an adult, I'm currently uncomfortable with the way that I handled geopolitics and race in this whole universe. It was a thought experiment that was really helpful to me as a developing teenager. But it's pretty broken as an actual, as a larger form of world building. So that's really uncomfortable. And yeah, I wish there was a little more nuance and people wouldn't quite just look at what they see as, a catch-all Asian name on a catch-all Asian fantasy and assume that the author has a certain relationship with the material, because that's a bit weird.
What's interesting that in Sword of Kaigen, your equivalent of Japan is actually a colony of Korea, which is being invaded by the equivalent of China. So it's kind of reversing.
Yes, and that was the device that in this world that I built as a teenager, I used to explore my really, really fraught feelings on race and colonialism and genocide and all that. And it's pretty broken. If I return to the universe, I'm gonna do some heavy restructuring, because as an adult, I don't like it as a processing tool. I think there's a lot of issues with it. But that was that was where it spawned, and it's weird, and I'm not Japanese.
So you did bring up own voices though, and I guess to shift back to the rest of you because you're more traditionally published, have your books been put into like sort of the own voices hashtag? Is that the way that your publishers are marketing it?
I don't think so. I mean, I was asked if it was okay to put that I was Chinese American in there, but I think that was more to avoid any kind of backlash over, you know, is this a white person writing an Asian book kind of thing. So I don't think it's been marketed as own voices as far as I know.
Oh, I wanted to, sorry, I meant to throw to Kay when I was done, because I know that you've specifically, not to put you on the spot if you don't feel like it, but I know that you've specifically talked about traditional publishing being a really good avenue for you to get your work in front of own voices readers, of people with whom the story really resonates. So for a positive spin, I wondered if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Yeah, like I don't like when I hear the word representation, I see like you're going to a foreign audience, like someone who's not like you, because you're like, oh, you're representing your people out there. And the way I think of my work is it's a like I've said this before, it's a love letter. Like everything, like the way I approach my work is, I guess it's out of love in a weird way, that which is where I examine, you know, it's kind of complex because like going all the way back, my background is I grew up in the slums in the Philippines. It's like you're really poor, and I guess growing up I had a lot of anger towards the way the system is, towards all the incompetent politicians. I felt a lot of anger that just living every day was a struggle, just like to have water, to have electricity. Like in our neighborhood, the electricity would go out for like weeks. Nobody cares. Nobody's gonna fix your problems for you. So I have this very complex relationship with the Philippines. And when I left, the most ironic part was that I missed it all. I missed it so much. It's like, it's driving you crazy at how much you miss this. And so just the way I approach my work, it's just processing all of that, everything about that. So it's a love story to the Philippines, who probably doesn't deserve it. and that's why like there are no, like, I write my work so that it's entertaining for whoever picks it up and reads it. But there's so much nuance there that's just meant for a Filipino audience in a way, where like it's not that other people can't see it or can't get it, but I'm speaking directly to a Filipino audience saying, see, why does this have to be the way it is? Like a great example there is like one of the backstories in Chronicles of the Bitch Queen is there's actually like a uprising from the farmer side, the rice farmers. And like my background is like both of my grandparents are from farming, like they were farmers. And so this is something that's meaningful to me, like how the government just ignores something so basic but necessary, because they're all like embroiled in like their own little wars, and they're all infighting and stuff like that. So I hate the word representation, because it's denying that idea without fiction. It's supposed to be like almost catharsis, like it's exploring questions. Like how can you represent something when you're not even sure? Like Western fiction can do all of these things. They can just go as deep as they want, and think about the human condition and stuff like that. So you know, if you're trying to represent with like, you know, trying to say, oh, this is how my culture is, it's it's very complex.
You said that your books could be read by anyone and enjoyed. Could they read like book 2 without reading book 1 and still enjoy it?
No, I wrote a line there. You gotta read it in order.
Oh, okay. Darn, I was about to do that. We have 3 minutes left, and we have a question from YouTube, from Frankenstein, but not spelled like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Probably a bit redundant of a question, but what would you advise to younger authors, especially in regards to this panel, those of Asian descent, that would love to represent their own cultures?
Do any
Basically,
teens start out writing thinking I want to represent my culture? I don't think they do. Maybe I'm doing a disservice to teenagers, but I don't think they have that nuance yet at that age. Certainly I didn't. But like to teen girls who are like me in the same boat as me, I would say that I hope you get to spend all the time you've got writing whatever the hell it is you want before you get into publishing, before you get into all of this shit that we're talking about. Because after you're published, after you've got your work out there, you'll never quite have the same innocent joy that you did when you were younger, the same freedom, the same lack of responsibility and expectations from people that you don't even give a two shits about.
anybody else advice for young Asian authors?
I agree.
I would.
Sounds like you're talking with
I think I think that's great advice. I would also say to just go out and read all the diverse fiction that's out there nowadays. I mean, it's something that I didn't really have, and I kind of envy kids who are coming up nowadays who have that available to them. But otherwise, I would say like write whatever you want and don't feel like you can't write something just because you don't see a lot of it out there.
I would pause face with it's unfair, but it's probably going to be hard, especially if you're, pursuing traditional Western publishing. It's still probably going to be harder for you than it is for, white cis hetero male authors. And again, the onus is going to be on you, and it really shouldn't be. But I think that unfortunately, at some point, you have to grow a thick enough skin to survive, as Vida was saying, right? To survive publishing. And you have to think on whether that's what you want to be doing as well, right? Not to discourage or anything, but I guess I wish one of the things that people had told me was, okay, you're really going to have to hang in there at some points, and it's okay. And it's okay also having a network of friends and people that, you can relate to and talk to and trust helps a lot.
I would like to say we are your network of friends out there. So if you're an Asian author and you're trying to get into the industry, I'm sure all of these wonderful people here are willing to give you some support.
We don't bite.
Nope.
K bites. K bites.
You don't bite until you say something stereotypical. That's
Damn
when
it,
we
that's
bite.
why she's bitten me so many times. Anybody else want to address what would you want to tell, like or even a younger version of yourself, or a person who's up and coming?
I think that, like, again, the focus on representation is not maybe the best way to look at it. Think of it as contributing your voice to a growing number of us, and we need more voices out there to even like hope to address some of the systemic issues that's happening, right? So do your best, learn your craft, and make your voice as strong as possible. Don't worry about anything else. As the others have said, don't worry about anything other than just letting your own interest, your own voice, make it as strong as possible, because you're contributing.
And I see Tanya in the chat. You were expressing concern about not being Chinese enough. Well, in that case, definitely don't brand on representation. And like Kay said, I think branding yourself on representation is it's not going to put you in a happy place creatively once you get in the industry. So I just don't don't worry about being enough of anything to like put your stamp on it. Just write from your little heart. And
Big heart.
always, I think a thing with indie publishing especially is like if you representation, and like Kay said, I think branding yourself on what happened. There's an echo. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So with indie publishing especially, if you have something that you think really works, that is a really good concept, and you're not seeing that much of it, like you're thinking, oh, I don't see this spin on this genre or something, you can make your own subgenre. You can set a trend, you can hit a little Amazon niche, and nobody actually knows what the next big subgenre that sells really well is going to be on Amazon. So even if you're not seeing the kind of fiction you think is a really good idea, it might still be a really good idea. You might still be able to pull it off.
Who would have thought sparkling vampires, right?
But I also want to say that on the subject of not being XX enough, that in my experience, the people who ask themselves that questions are not the people who really should be asking themselves that question, right? I feel like a lot of us who struggle with are we, Asian enough, Vietnamese enough? Is it okay to be diaspora? All that's, I'm not saying those questions are invalid, but I'm also saying that they can feed an imposter syndrome that is probably making it sound like a much bigger thing than it should be. And again, that's tremendously unfair that the onus gets put back on us to actually ask ourselves those questions.
I want to say also that as a native Filipino, other writers have told me that I am not Filipino enough, me living here in the Philippines. And so I want to say that I don't give a shit about that question, and I don't think you should either. And you should not listen to anyone who tells you that you are not X enough, because what do they know?
Andrea, did you?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I was just gonna say. I often think about these questions in the perspective of like, well, what would a mediocre white man do? So, like just like I feel like when you do come from this position, like it's felt that way where it's like, am I Chinese enough to write something that is Asian inspired? But you look at other people who are not questioning themselves at all. And just making a complete mess of things. So I think if you're asking yourself that question, you are going to treat it in a way that's not going to be awful. So I feel like that's a terrible question. It's a terrible thing for people to be thinking, like, are you enough to write this?
We should make a t-shirt, WWMWMD. What would a mediocre white man do? There's a WMD in there, right?
Well, I mean, I think like I just see like those two I see like mediocre white men like not questioning themselves on anything all the time, and getting away with it and doing things that are praised. So yeah.
To all the Tanya Chuns out there, I just want to say that if you're on Facebook, I don't know, maybe the young people aren't on Facebook, but if you go on Facebook, we have an Asian author group. Find me and I will invite you to the group. And Andrea will be speaking to us sometime later this month, time to be determined. It is 7:06, but if you have time for one more question, I thought of this. If panelists have time, if not, we can bid you good night. Okay, I was wondering, do you feel that you are pigeonholed into sort of writing about Asia or your own specific area, or do you feel like you could write a story about Western European fantasy and find a market for it, find a publisher for it? Silence. I'm asking horrible questions that I don't know.
It's just, I think these are not horrible questions. I think they are just very difficult questions. That I mean,
this mediocre Chinese back should have
because like, well, Well, it's like it's one of those things too where you're like, well, if I answer, am I stepping on anybody's toes and things like that too? I think about that a lot. I don't know. I mean, honestly, this is something that I think about because I don't just write Asian inspired fantasy. I've written and published a lot of short stories, and although there are some with Asian main characters, they kind of run the gamut. And I'm hoping that it doesn't mean that I'm pigeonholed in a certain way. I think that some of my cultural sensibilities are always going to bleed into my work, but I hope that it doesn't mean that I am in this area not allowed to explore like creating my own unique cultures, for example. So we'll see.
So with that insightful answer, with the rest of you, I'm pretty sure have had time to think about that. What do you think?
You know what? It's a hard question for me to answer because I'm still at the beginning of my career, and no matter what I submit, whether it's a medieval European inspired fairy tale, which I have written, or a Filipino inspired story, I'm still at the point where I'm all, okay, I'm getting great rejection letters, but why won't you publish me if you think this is so good? Why? Do I have bad luck? I don't know. And this happens for all the kinds of stories I write. So am I pigeonholed into something? Probably. What am I pigeonholed into? I don't know.
I mean, I certainly feel this that, I mean, I've never felt it, but I know that the pressure exists, right? And I know there's been a fair amount of backlash. I was thinking about Aidan Thomas specifically, but I'm sure there have been other examples of being accused of being some kind of traitor or writing inappropriate books because their book wasn't in tune with their ethnicities. And I know that Adrian Thomas is not Asian, right? But that's the I can't think of anyone Asian who's had that, but I'm sure they exist. So I do feel you were talking about own voices earlier, and I really have very conflicted feelings about the label because while the creator of the label and a lot of people who pushed it had what I think are very, it was part of something that was very important, and I totally support the original intention. I definitely feel, however, that it's been weaponized into pigeonholing people and going like, well, you have to write own voices stories because those are the things that we want to publish. And also, are you enough to be writing own voices story? And if you pay attention, that's only happening to people of color. It's only people of color who have issues with that. And I'm looking at it and feeling very jaundiced and going like, sorry, do you realize what it is that you're doing? So again, no personal experience, but I definitely think it's a thing.
Yeah, it's probably a thing in trad pub circles, but personally it's just something I don't want to worry about because like I'm doing indie publishing along with traditional. So to me, if they don't want to take a book because for some reason they don't think that it represents me, it's going out there anyway. I'm making it so that it's almost indistinguishable from a trad pub novel. So I want to make my own image. Like I this is my thing. I don't want gatekeepers to dictate my craft and my art. That's my personal expression. And if they have their own idea, then I can't really tell them how to run their business.
Yeah, sorry, were you done, Kay?
Yeah.
So in my cynicism, since the Sword of Kaigen, which I completely flubbed my publishing schedule after that, and I will have not published something for like 3 years because it did kind of knock me off kilter. But in my cynicism about that, I am extremely insecure that it was the Japanese aesthetics that a lot of my readers, especially a lot of my white male readers, really liked about that book. And whether or not that's reasonable, that's like one of these insidious little things that worms its way into me. And I said that I was uncomfortable with the way that I'd structured sort of geopolitics and race relations in that universe that I've now discontinued. So in part to get away from that, I've moved far away from direct analog cultures into really much more fantastical cultures where I feel I can experiment more freely without being pressured to represent something. And yet, among all those projects that I've started, it's the one with a really East Asian aesthetic that people have overwhelmingly expressed interest in. So that makes me worried that I've pigeonholed myself into this. Well, it's not even, the other one is vaguely Chinese themed, whereas the Sword of Kaigen was Japanese themed, but then I worry that this this predisposition to an East Asian aesthetic doesn't even distinguish between those, which is a bit disturbing to me. But maybe I'm making it all up in my head and it'll all be fine. And everybody's interest is genuine and without any of the malice that I'm attaching to it. Hopefully that's the case.
Just an ending question here, because I'm really curious about this. What are you working on now? This is not a hard question.
No, I'm working on a retelling of the Grimm fairy tale Wild Swans, and I'm setting it in pre-colonial Philippines. And if I could just stop for a moment on working on other people's work, maybe I would get, maybe I would get further in this story than I already am.
I'm working on a gender bent retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo, set in space.
But in
a
space.
setting.
Cool. Anybody else? What you working on? I guess you told
I'm
us
just
already.
Yeah, I'm just working on the Bone Shard War, which is the third one in the Drowning Empire trilogy. So that's my focus right now.
I think ML said you're working on two different things that are based on.
Oh, I'm working on a lot of different things. The one that's out soonest will be a novella that's quite off-brand for me. So we'll see if people like it.
And then Kay, what are you working on?
Which one? I have a thing that's with my agent right now. I'm waiting for feedback on that. I have 2 new things for indie publishing, and I've lost track. I think I have a relaunch later this year. I don't know how I'm gonna get all of this done. Honestly, I'm trying to write, I'm gonna finish one draft, and then after that immediately move to revisions, and then I jump back, and I don't know if it makes any sense.
Well, thank you all so much for coming today. We went 15 minutes over time, so thank you, especially those of you in very late time zones, or very early time zones. I did post the link to the Facebook group of Asian authors, so come join us. Once again, thank you for being here and sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi.
Okay, and we are no longer live on YouTube.